My fiancée called from Vegas saying she needed to explore her options. I said, go for it, and packed her stuff while she was away. Now she's back to find her belongings in storage and her family is flooding my phone demanding I take her back. This happened about a year ago, but I'm finally ready to tell this story. I thought I was building something real with Madison, but looking back, I was just funding her fantasy life while she auditioned for something better. At 31, I'm a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm making $95,000, not rich, but stable enough to own a decent 2-bedroom condo and actually have savings. This apparently made me marriage material in Madison's eyes when we got engaged 4 years ago. Madison was 28, worked part-time at an upscale salon doing nails, but her real passion was her lifestyle blog where she posted about fashion, travel, and living your best life. This content somehow required a constant stream of designer outfits, expensive restaurant visits, and weekend getaways that always seemed to end up on my credit card. She had about 3,200 followers, mostly other aspiring influencers and women who wanted her lifestyle but couldn't afford it either. Madison was convinced she was just one viral post away from major brand sponsorships that would change everything. The problem was, those sponsorships never materialized, but her spending kept escalating because you have to spend money to make money, and image is everything in this business. My engineering buddy Connor had been warning me for months that something didn't add up. Dude, I've run the numbers, he told me over beers one night, pulling out his phone to show me screenshots he'd been tracking. She posts about a $300 brunch on Sunday, then a $500 shopping haul on Tuesday, then some $150 skincare routine on Thursday. Her salon job pays maybe $400 a week part-time, but she's burning through $2,000 monthly just on content creation. Connor was the kind of guy who analyzed everything like an engineering problem, methodical, logical, and usually right about people's motivations. I'd been covering her share of groceries, utilities, and rent for months because her business expenses always seemed to eat up her entire paycheck. Plus I was funding what she called content investments, the designer handbags, restaurant meals, and weekend trips that supposedly helped build her brand but mostly just built up my credit card balance. Ryan, baby, I know this seems like a lot right now, she'd say whenever I questioned a particularly expensive purchase, but I'm building something bigger here. Once I hit 10,000 followers, the brand deals will start coming in, and I'll be able to pay you back for everything plus more. She had this way of making me feel small for worrying about money, like I was some penny-pinching accountant who didn't understand the investment required for entrepreneurial success. The breaking point came when she wanted to attend some influencer conference in Miami that cost $2,800 for the weekend, flights, hotel, conference fees. Plus, she needed a whole new wardrobe because networking is everything in this industry. I'd been looking at engagement rings, thinking about proposing properly since we'd been talking about marriage for years, but suddenly I was supposed to finance her business dreams instead of our future together. This conference could change everything for us, she insisted, showing me Instagram posts from previous attendees who'd supposedly landed major deals. Sarah from the blog Golden Coast Living met her sponsor there last year, and now she's getting paid $5,000 per post. When I suggested maybe she should use her own savings or try to get a brand to sponsor her attendance, her face shifted to that disappointed expression she'd perfected. I thought you believed in me, she said quietly. I thought you wanted me to succeed. Connor just shook his head when I told him I'd agreed to pay for the Miami trip. Brother, you're not investing in her business, he said bluntly. You're paying for her to play dress up and pretend she's successful. Real entrepreneurs risk their own money, not their boyfriends. But I loved her, or at least I loved who I thought she was, and I genuinely wanted to support her dreams even if they seemed unrealistic to everyone else. Looking back, I can see that Madison never actually loved me. She loved the financial security I provided and the lifestyle I enabled, but she was always scanning the horizon for someone who could offer her more, someone who could fund bigger dreams and better content. I just didn't realize that her latest business trip to Vegas would be the audition for my replacement. The Vegas trip started innocently enough. Madison's salon co-workers Emma and Sarah had planned a girls' weekend and invited her along, which seemed perfectly reasonable until I learned the total cost would be $3,200 for 3 days. Emma and Sarah were both 26 and 28 respectively, still living with roommates despite working full-time because they spent every paycheck on maintaining the same lifestyle Madison aspired to, so naturally they expected me to fund Madison's portion of their luxury weekend since I was the one with the stable job. The itinerary read like something designed for trust fund kids. suite at the Bellagio, VIP dining experiences, pool cabanas, and tickets to some exclusive rooftop party that cost $400 per person just to get in the door. This isn't just a vacation, baby, Madison explained while showing me photos of influencers who'd attended similar events in previous years. This is a networking opportunity. Some of the biggest lifestyle bloggers in the country will be there, plus there are always successful business people at these Vegas events who might want to collaborate. I should have paid more attention to that last part about successful business people, but I was focused on the cost and trying to understand how a nail technician's weekend getaway had somehow become a $3,200 business expense. Connor offered to split the cost with me as an early wedding gift, which should have been my first clue that even he thought this was ridiculous, but I declined and put the whole thing on my credit card because Madison had been so excited about the networking potential. The first 2 days went quiet, just the occasional Instagram story of overpriced cocktails and designer outfit changes, typical influencer content that made me wonder what exactly she was networking about since most of her posts were just her and the girls posing in expensive locations. Then came the phone call on Sunday night that changed everything. I was watching football when my phone rang, and Madison's voice sounded different, breathless and excited in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Ryan, hi, I know you're probably wondering why I haven't called much this weekend," she started, and immediately I knew something was wrong because she was using that carefully rehearsed tone she got when she'd practiced a conversation. "I need to tell you something important, and I need you to really listen without getting upset." The words that followed hit me like cold water. "This weekend has been incredible, and I've met some amazing people who've really opened my eyes about what's possible in life," she continued, her voice gaining confidence like she was reading from a script she'd perfected. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about our future, and I realize I need to explore my options before I settle down. Vegas has shown me there's so much more out there than I ever imagined." Explore her options. Those words hung in the air while I processed what I was hearing. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "It means I need space to figure out what I really want," she said, her voice now taking on that patient tone she used when explaining obvious things to stupid people. "I've met some very successful entrepreneurs this weekend, and they've helped me see that I've been thinking too small about my life and my future. I can't just jump into marriage without making sure I'm not missing out on something better." Something better? After 4 years together, I was apparently just the safe option she needed to rule out before pursuing whatever had caught her attention in Vegas. I hung up without saying much else because what was there to say? She'd basically called to tell me I was being demoted from fiancé to backup plan while she auditioned for an upgrade. Connor came over an hour later with beer and his laptop, having already started investigating what exactly Madison had been up to during her networking weekend. "Dude, you need to see this," he said, pulling up her blog and Instagram stories I'd missed. The posts told a completely different story than the one she'd shared with me. Photos of her at high-roller casino tables with some silver-haired businessman in an expensive suit, captions about meeting successful entrepreneurs who understand the finer things in life, and blog posts with titles like "When Opportunity Knocks in Unexpected Places" and "Recognizing Your Worth in New Environments." In one particularly telling photo, she was wearing a dress I'd never seen before that probably cost more than her monthly salary, sitting next to a man who looked old enough to be her father but was clearly wealthy enough to make her forget she had a fiancé back home. "This guy's got to be loaded," Connor observed, zooming in on the man's watch and jewelry. "And look at this, she's hashtagged about life-changing conversations and seeing what's possible. She's not networking for her blog, man. She's shopping for a sugar daddy." The evidence was right there in her own posts, documented for her 3,200 followers to see. My fiancé of 4 years had essentially gone to Vegas to see if she could trade up to someone with deeper pockets and a more exciting lifestyle. The most insulting part was how transparent she'd been about it, like she assumed I was too stupid to connect the dots or too desperate to do anything about it even if I did. Connor's engineering mind couldn't let it go, and by Tuesday morning he'd uncovered enough evidence to build a federal case against Madison's character. "Brother, this gets so much worse," he said, calling me at work with the excitement of someone who just solved a complex puzzle. I reverse-searched some of her photos and found her profiles on 3 different dating apps, all active within the last 2 months. Her Bumble says she's exploring new connections and looking for successful, ambitious partners who know how to live well. He'd also discovered her internet search history was full of queries about luxury Vegas condos, high-end apartment complexes, and cost of living comparisons between our city and Las Vegas, all dating back nearly 4 months. This wasn't some spontaneous awakening during a weekend trip. Madison had been systematically planning her exit strategy and using my money to fund the reconnaissance mission. When I got home that evening, I started my own investigation and found things that made Connor's discoveries look amateur. Hidden in her laptop browser history were saved listings for Vegas apartments that cost more than my monthly salary, bookmarked articles about how to date successfully as a relocated professional, and a draft blog post titled, "Sometimes Love Means Letting Go," that was clearly intended to be her public breakup announcement. But the real smoking gun was tucked behind her dresser, a stack of credit card statements I'd never seen before showing she'd been building a secret emergency fund for months. Except instead of saving money, she'd been systematically running up debt on cards I didn't know existed. The statements showed cash advances totaling $8,400, expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, and shopping sprees that explained how she'd been maintaining her designer wardrobe on a nail technician's salary. "I've been planning this Vegas thing for a while now," read one text conversation I found on an old phone she'd left charging, part of a thread with Emma discussing the trip. "Ryan's sweet, but he thinks so small. I need someone who can match my ambitions, you know?" Emma's response was equally enlightening. "Girl, you've been carrying him for too long. Time to find someone who can actually keep up with your lifestyle." Apparently, I'd been carrying her by paying for everything while she'd been carrying me by gracing me with her presence. The financial records painted a clear picture. Madison had been methodically preparing for this exploration phase for months, building up debt to fund her lifestyle until she could find someone better positioned to take over the payments. She'd even researched jobs at luxury Vegas hotels and had been corresponding with HR departments about potential relocation opportunities. This wasn't a sudden realization about wanting more from life. This was a calculated business plan with me as the unwitting investor in her startup search for a wealthier partner. I spent that night calculating exactly how much I'd invested in our relationship over the past year. $31,000 in direct expenses, plus another $12,000 in shared costs I'd covered when she claimed to be a little short this month. That money could have been a down payment on a house, a new car, or a solid investment portfolio, but instead it had funded Madison's market research for finding my replacement. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls that felt like breaking chains I hadn't realized were restraining me. First, I called our wedding venue and canceled our deposit, losing $2,400 but saving the remaining $8,600 we owed for a ceremony that was clearly never going to happen. Then I called a real estate agent about finding a smaller place, something I could actually afford on my own without constantly worrying about covering someone else's expenses. Looking for something more manageable, the agent asked when I explained I needed a 1-bedroom instead of our current 2-bedroom setup. Downsizing can be incredibly liberating, especially when you're simplifying your life. Simplifying my life. I liked the sound of that, and it felt like the first honest conversation I'd had about my future in months. Within a week, I'd found a 1-bedroom loft downtown that cost $800 less per month than our current place. Exposed brick, decent kitchen, and most importantly, space I could actually afford without constantly calculating whether I could cover someone else's lifestyle expenses. The move felt like emerging from underwater and finally being able to breathe normally again. Connor helped me coordinate the logistics while Madison was still in Vegas, presumably exploring her options with Mr. Silverhair and whoever else had caught her attention during her extended networking session. The wedding vendor cancellations were surprisingly therapeutic. Each phone call felt like cutting another anchor that had been dragging me down toward financial disaster. The florist was understanding, the photographer offered to apply our deposit toward a different event if my circumstances changed, and the caterer actually thanked me for giving them advance notice instead of waiting until the last minute like most people apparently do. "You're handling this really maturely," the venue coordinator told me when I explained the situation. "Most people in your position are either furious or in denial. You seem remarkably clear-headed about everything." Clear-headed was exactly right. For the first time in months, I wasn't making decisions based on managing Madison's expectations or funding her dreams. I was just solving practical problems like an adult who controlled his own life. The real discovery happened when I started packing Madison's belongings and realized I was essentially cataloging evidence of a double life I'd been too trusting to notice. Hidden in her closet were designer pieces still in their original packaging, a $1,200 handbag, $800 shoes, jewelry worth more than my monthly car payment, all purchased within the last 3 months according to the receipts I found carefully stored in a shoebox. These weren't impulse purchases. They were investments in the image she needed to attract the kind of man who could afford to maintain her in the style she felt she deserved. Even more revealing were the printed emails I found in a folder labeled Future Plans, correspondence with luxury Vegas hotels about guest services positions, inquiries about high-end apartment complexes near the Strip, and what looked like research on Nevada divorce laws despite the fact that we weren't even married yet. One email chain with the Wynn Hotel HR department was particularly illuminating. "I'm relocating to Vegas to be with my partner who's in the entertainment industry," Madison had written. "I have extensive customer service experience and understand the importance of maintaining discretionary relationships with high-net-worth clients. My partner in the entertainment industry." I wondered if Mr. Silverhair knew he'd been promoted to entertainment industry professional, or if that was just Madison's way of making him sound more impressive than whatever he actually did for money. There were also printed MapQuest directions to expensive Vegas neighborhoods, screenshots of luxury car dealerships, and what appeared to be a draft resignation letter from the salon that was dated 2 weeks before her Vegas trip. This was an exploration. This was a planned relocation that had been in the works for months, with me unknowingly funding the preparation phase like some kind of unwitting business partner in my own replacement. I rented a storage unit across town and carefully packed everything that belonged to her, taking photos of each box's contents because something told me I might need documentation later. Connor helped me load her furniture, clothes, blog equipment, and all those hidden designer purchases into the 10 by 10 space that cost $89 per month, less than what Madison typically spent on a single dinner when she was networking for her business. The storage facility manager, a practical woman in her 50s, handed me the paperwork with the kind of knowing look that suggested she'd seen this scenario before. "Units paid through the end of next month," she said. "After that, it's her responsibility. We'll send notices to whatever address you provide." I left the storage unit key with my building manager along with Madison's forwarding information and a note explaining that her belongings had been safely stored and she could arrange pickup at her convenience. No drama, no destroyed property, no revenge tactics, just a clean, adult resolution to a situation that had become untenable. Walking away from that storage unit felt like closing the final chapter on 4 years of gradually subsidizing someone else's fantasy life while my own goals got smaller and smaller to accommodate her expanding dreams. Madison's return from Vegas was everything I'd expected and more entertaining than I'd hoped. She showed up at our old apartment Thursday evening, probably expecting to waltz in and continue her exploration from the comfort of home base, only to find my building manager waiting with a storage unit key and my forwarding address. Connor got the play-by-play from his girlfriend Lisa, who worked at the salon with Emma and Sarah, and apparently Madison's reaction was immediate and spectacular. "She completely lost it," Lisa reported during Connor's evening debrief call. "Started screaming about how Ryan had sabotaged her future and demanding to know if what he did was even legal. Emma and Sarah were trying to calm her down, but she kept yelling about how this was all some controlling manipulation to force her to come crawling back. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd spent months planning to abandon our relationship was now furious that I'd made it easier for her to leave by packing her things and finding her a place to store them. But Madison's real panic had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with the fact that her Vegas prospects had evaporated faster than her credibility. Mr. Silverhair, whose name was apparently Richard and who definitely had the kind of money Madison was hoping for, had been blocked from all contact after his wife discovered his weekend activities through Madison's very public Instagram documentation of their time together. Turns out the guy was married with 3 kids, Connor explained, scrolling through the social media detective work his girlfriend had compiled. His wife found Madison's blog posts about meeting successful entrepreneurs and put 2 and 2 together when she saw her husband in the background of about 15 different photos. Richard's wife had apparently been thorough in her investigation, finding not just the Vegas photos but also Madison's dating app profiles and her blog posts about recognizing when you deserve better that were clearly targeted at married men with disposable income. The fallout was swift and complete. Richard blocked Madison on everything, threatened legal action if she continued posting about him, and according to Emma's gossip network, his wife had started her own social media campaign warning other women about the predatory blogger targeting married businessmen in Vegas. But Madison's response to this disaster was pure gold from an entertainment perspective. Instead of quietly regrouping and maybe learning something about consequences, she decided to go nuclear with a crowdfunding campaign that was so tone-deaf it became accidentally hilarious. The GoFundMe page, titled Rebuilding After Relationship Sabotage, claimed that I was a controlling and financially abusive ex-fiancée who had deliberately sabotaged her business opportunities and personal growth by moving her belongings without permission. I'm reaching out to my community for support after my ex systematically destroyed my attempts to build an independent life. The campaign description read, complete with photos of her looking appropriately victimized. He canceled our wedding out of spite when I told him I needed space to focus on my career, then illegally removed my belongings from our shared home while I was traveling for business. I now need help covering basic living expenses and storage fees while I rebuild my life from the ground up. The campaign was asking for $15,000 to cover emergency housing, legal fees, and business restart costs, and for about 6 hours, it actually seemed like it might work. Several of her blog followers donated small amounts, and her salon coworkers shared the link with sympathy posts about supporting women escaping toxic relationships. Emma even posted a long Instagram story about standing with survivors of financial abuse that got shared dozens of times before reality caught up with Madison's narrative. The problem with lying on the internet is that evidence has a way of surfacing, especially when you've been documenting your own contradictory behavior for months. By Friday morning, Connor's girlfriend had shared Madison's Vegas blog posts and dating app screenshots with enough people that the Betrayal story started spreading faster than Madison's fundraising appeal. "Check this out," Connor said, forwarding me screenshots of the comments section on Madison's crowdfunding page. People started posting links to her blog posts about finding her sugar daddy and screenshots of her Bumble profile. Someone even found her old Instagram stories from Vegas with the married guy. The comments were brutal and accurate. This is the same person who posted about meeting successful entrepreneurs in Vegas last week and has dating profiles saying she's looking for ambitious partners who know how to live well, wrote one user. Sounds like her business trip was actually shopping for a new boyfriend and now she's mad her backup plan moved on. Another comment included screenshots of her blog posts with the caption, "She literally wrote about recognizing when you deserve better and not settling for small dreams, but now claims her ex was financially abusive for not wanting to fund her lifestyle indefinitely." Which story is true? By Saturday, the campaign had been reported so many times for fraudulent claims that GoFundMe removed it entirely and refunded the $347 she'd managed to raise. Madison's attempt to crowdsource her revenge had backfired into a public documentation of her character that spread far beyond her original follower base, reaching people who screenshot her contradictory posts and shared them as examples of social media manipulation tactics. The family intervention calls started Monday morning with Madison's sister Kelly, who apparently hadn't gotten the full story about her sister's Vegas adventure. "Ryan, I don't know what happened between you two, but Madison is absolutely devastated," Kelly began, using the concerned family member tone that immediately put me on guard. "She's staying at some awful extended stay motel and crying constantly. Whatever fight you had, surely you can work this out like adults and get back to planning your wedding." I explained the actual timeline, Madison calling to tell me she needed to explore her options, the evidence of months of planning her exit strategy, the dating app profiles, and her very public documentation of pursuing a married businessman in Vegas. Kelly's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "She said you became controlling and possessive when she tried to focus on her career," Kelly finally responded, though her voice had lost its initial confidence. "That you canceled the wedding out of spite when she asked for space to grow personally." The family narrative was predictably different from reality, but I'd expected that. Madison had always been skilled at reframing her choices as other people's failures, so naturally I'd become the villain who sabotaged her personal growth rather than the guy who stopped funding her search for an upgrade. Madison's parents called next, with her father taking the lead in what sounded like a carefully rehearsed intervention. "Son, I know young people have their disagreements, but Madison tells us you've put her in an impossible situation," he said with the weary patience of someone who'd been dealing with Madison's crises for years. "She says she owes almost $48,000 between expenses you covered, credit cards she maxed out expecting to combine finances after marriage, and wedding deposits. Now she has no way to pay any of it back because you've destroyed her living situation." The number shocked even Madison's own family, though they were focusing on my supposed cruelty in expecting repayment rather than questioning how someone making nail technician wages had managed to accumulate that level of debt in the first place. The wedding venue wants their remaining balance, the caterer is threatening collections, and she's got credit cards maxed out because she was depending on combining finances after marriage, her mother added. "You can't just abandon someone financially like this, Ryan. It's not Christian." The moral lecture was rich coming from people whose daughter had publicly shopped for a sugar daddy while engaged, but I kept my response simple. "I'm not abandoning anyone financially," I said. I'm just not continuing to subsidize someone who told me she needed to explore her options before settling down with me. The legal threats came Tuesday, delivered through a lawyer Madison had apparently found who specialized in what she called abandoned property recovery. The letter claimed I'd illegally removed her belongings from our shared residence and demanded I reinstate her access to the apartment and reimburse her for storage fees and temporary housing costs. Connor read the letter and started laughing before he'd finished the first paragraph. "Dude, this lawyer doesn't know what he's talking about," he said, pointing to the legal language. "You properly stored her belongings and provided written notice of their location. Plus, your lease was solely in your name, so she never had legal tenant rights anyway. This is just intimidation." The letter also demanded I restore the canceled wedding arrangements and honor previous financial commitments made during the relationship, which suggested Madison was still hoping legal pressure could force me back into funding her lifestyle. I responded through my own attorney with documentation showing the proper storage procedures I'd followed and copies of Madison's own social media posts and blog entries proving she'd voluntarily ended our relationship to pursue other options. Her lawyer stopped returning her calls after that, probably because even he realized that suing someone for refusing to continue paying your bills after you dumped them wasn't a viable legal strategy, no matter how much debt you'd accumulated in the process. The final confrontation came 3 weeks later when Madison showed up at my office, somehow having gotten past building security to corner me in the lobby after work. She looked different, thinner, wearing clothes I recognized from 2 years ago, and there was a desperate energy about her that reminded me of someone trying to sell something nobody wanted to buy. "Ryan, please, just give me 5 minutes," she said, positioning herself between me and the exit doors. "I know I made mistakes, but I've learned from them. I want to fix this." What I noticed immediately was the ring on her finger, not the engagement ring I'd been planning to buy her, but a different one, cheaper, with a stone that looked suspiciously like cubic zirconia. "Congratulations," I said, nodding toward her hand. Someone moved fast. Her face flushed and she twisted the ring nervously. That didn't work out. He wasn't who I thought he was. Apparently, Madison had gotten engaged to someone else during her extended Vegas exploration, a detail that made her current desperation even more entertaining. The guy had been another businessman she'd met at the casino, someone who'd seemed excited about her lifestyle blog and had proposed after knowing her for less than 2 weeks. Unfortunately for Madison, he turned out to be going through an expensive divorce and was looking for someone to help maintain his image during court proceedings rather than someone whose lifestyle he'd actually fund long-term. He dumped me when his lawyer told him that being engaged to an aspiring influencer would hurt his custody case, she admitted when I pressed for details. Said I was too high maintenance and visible on social media. Now I have no job, no place to live, and everyone thinks I'm some kind of gold-digging scammer because of those stupid screenshots. The irony was perfect. Madison had found exactly the kind of successful businessman she'd been shopping for, only to discover that men with real money tend to be just as calculating as the women who chase them. He'd used her for temporary companionship and image management, then discarded her when she became inconvenient, which was essentially the same thing she'd planned to do to me. "I realize now that what we had was real," she continued, tears starting to form in a performance that might have worked 4 months earlier. "You were stable and kind and you actually cared about me. I was stupid to think I needed something more exciting." I'd been promoted to senior project manager 2 weeks earlier with a $15,000 raise, and had just closed on a townhouse that I could actually afford on my own income. My life had improved dramatically once I'd stopped subsidizing someone else's fantasy lifestyle, and listening to Madison try to manipulate her way back into that stability felt like watching someone try to convince you to jump back into quicksand. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I told her, stepping around her toward the exit. "But it's not going to be with me." 6 months later, I ran into Madison's father at a hardware store, and the update he provided was both sad and fitting. Madison had moved to rural Ohio to work at her uncle's farm supply store after her family staged an intervention about her social media addiction and financial irresponsibility. "We took away her phone and made her delete all her accounts," he said with the weary expression of someone who'd finally accepted reality about his daughter. "She's living in a trailer behind the store, making $12 an hour, and learning what it actually costs to support yourself when nobody else is paying your bills." He paused, loading fence posts into his truck. "She asks about you sometimes, says you were the best thing that ever happened to her and she was too young and stupid to appreciate it." I nodded politely and wished him well, but the truth was I rarely thought about Madison anymore. When you've found genuine stability and peace, the chaos you escaped stops feeling relevant to your life. Connor was right about everything. I hadn't lost a fiancé, I'd escaped from someone who saw me as a human ATM with good credit and poor boundaries. The best part wasn't revenge, it was finally being free to build the life I actually wanted.